Did you know that people have been talking smack about me? I know. It's crazy, but they have. And you know where I've seen it is from a lot of traditional educators and learning science people who don't like the idea that we focus on growth mindset at our schools. Growth mindset. So, we're going to talk on this episode all about what growth mindset is, what it's not, and what we see as the benefits in our schools. And today, to help me do that, is Alexis Wilson. She is one of our amazing guides who works in our school system. She is a growth mindset and performance coach who our kids are so lucky to get to be around and influenced by. So, Alexis, let's talk growth mindset. And
Let's.
why are people hating on me? What's up?
I don't know why the people are hating. Probably because they haven't tried to apply it to their own lives and are
Mhm.
outside looking in and just think it's a bunch of woo-woo, fluffy stuff that has no
And
basis.
you know what? I am not into woo woo fluffy stuff. I will tell you, I am open minded to understand things. So I am not like a here, it only should be this way or whatever. But I also not into like woo woo. So, first thing I think we should do in this conversation is let's ground what is growth mindset in that area and what it is not.
Welcome to the Future of Education podcast, hosted by Mackenzie Price. Mackenzie is the founder of a revolutionary new school model that's disrupting education through AI. Join us as we discuss the latest in education innovation.
Growth mindset is when you decide you don't want to have a fixed mindset. You don't want to say, I am capped by my ability and I'm not going to be able to expand. Instead, you're like, I can do anything if I put in the reps, if I get in the practice, if I put in the work, I can become better at anything I put my mind to.
Yes. Fixed mindset. Nothing will change. Nothing that I do will impact or change the situation, the outcome, the experience, whatever it is, versus this growth mindset of there are things like I have agency over my experience. So we talk a lot about fixed mindset and growth mindset in our schools. Now, the other thing I think it is not is it's not just empty, vacuous self accolades or self mantras of
Just random,
I'm
empty
perfect.
self-affirmations. I
Self-affirmations,
I
yeah.
can do anything. And it's like, do you actually believe that? Do you have evidence? Does your brain have evidence to believe that? Have you
Mhm.
gotten the reps in? I think it goes back to that as well.
And, just to speak on that for a little bit, because that whole kind of just self love, self affirmation culture has gone so big in recent years. But I will tell you some of the challenges that can happen from that is if a kid is being told, like, you're the best, you're wonderful, everybody loves you, everyone thinks you're awesome, but you don't see evidence of that. It can almost cause a distrust of like, I don't know if I can trust other people who are saying these things to me, right? Because I'm not seeing evidence about this. And so that's something that, we really want to be thoughtful about how we are creating this growth mindset kind of strategy. And, I'm a huge fan of growth mindset and I see it all the time, the incredible things that it allows our kids to do. There are some people who claim that this concept of growth mindset doesn't have substance, but there's actually a lot of science that backs up this idea around what a growth mindset looks like.
Yes. I mean, I naturally think of neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to form new neural connections and to learn and to adapt and to change. There's tons of science behind growth mindset and our ability to change how we think and thus change how we act and show up in the world and the outcomes that we get.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about growth mindset, Dr. Carol Dweck
Mhm.
is a very, very famous professor and psychologist who has studied growth mindset. And I have a great story about Carol Dweck.
Mm.
I was going to meet her. She lives near Stanford University, and I was going to meet her at her home talking about what we're doing at Alpha and growth mindset. And I needed an Uber to get there. And I could not get an Uber. I could not get an Uber. I could not get an Uber. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late for my meeting with Dr. Dweck. This is not good. And I ended up hitchhiking
Mackenzie.
to her house. I picked up my hitchhiking ride from coming out of a Stanford Medical Center area. And I was like, and I was knocking on the doors at the stoplight. And so it wasn't like, I was like, I kind of picked them. They didn't pick me. And a guy and his son ended up taking me there. And like 2 years ago.
You are hilarious.
So I showed up at Carol's house and I had hitchhiked to her house and I felt like that was a pretty good intro. She's like, "Mhm."
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. At least you picked someone that had a kid in the car. That's a little bit more
I
safe.
I was thoughtful about how I was
Yeah.
doing it. I
Yeah.
was like, I bet I will say the first car I picked was this woman
Oh, it's
and
multiple.
she and well, I tried the first one, I got rejected. And I was like, excuse me. And the lady's like, I'm like, I'm so sorry. I was just wondering. And it's not that. And she's like, no. And rolled her window of like, I'm out of here. And then the second car worked. One of the ways to frame this conversation is when we do look at what a fixed mindset is compared to a growth mindset. And so for parents who are listening or teachers who are listening, what are some of the common fixed mindset either statements or attitudes that you often see and what is the antithesis of those?
Absolutely. So things like, that's just not my thing.
Mhm.
Not into that. I don't really care about that. That's just too hard. I'm not good at that. That's not my thing, I think is probably the biggest one. And I feel like it's often rooted as a cover for something a little bit deeper. And I think when you get to reframe and you get to explore, well, why don't you think it's your thing? And tell me more on that. You can see that there's something at the root that you can coach and reframe for the kid to be able to move forward and change their thought process and thus their actions,
So
that mindset.
that's not my thing. If a parent is hearing that, what is the growth mindset attitude?
That would be, I don't know enough about this thing yet, but there's opportunity for me to learn about it so I have enough confidence to go forward.
What's an example of a kid you've worked with where you've gone from that's not my thing to like, okay, I have a growth mindset around this?
Yeah. I've had a few kids who did not want to do public speaking in any capacity.
That's not my thing.
That's not my thing. And would say even stronger statements, actually. I had a student who identified as the worst reader in her class. And that's what teachers had told her. You're in the bottom percent. I'm the worst reader in my class. And I don't like to do public speaking. It was connected to her ability to be able to read and practice. And, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And
Mm.
when we first talked, she told me, like, I don't want to work on that. She was really adamantly against it. And I remember sitting with her and saying, okay, I can understand that, especially given what you've experienced at your previous school. Do you want to stay there? You don't have to identify as a terrible public speaker who can't read and isn't confident. If you want, we can create a new identity. If you're willing, I'll
Mm.
help you to get there. And she genuinely thought about it for like 30 seconds before she responded.
How old was she?
7 at
Okay,
the
so
time.
this is such a great example because I think sometimes we adults can forget that kids are little people who have feelings, they have
Mm.
thoughts, they are able to kind of think through something. And that conversation that you had was actually, it was pretty direct and it was pretty concrete in like, hey, there's another path you could take that might end up at a different destination. If that's something you're interested in exploring, would you like to maybe see what this world could look like? Like, what if that wasn't how your attitude was? Would that be? And I think sometimes that's something that it's like we almost don't give kids the respect of understanding that they do have some choice in how they live their lives and how they identify. And they can kind of say, okay, wait a second. And I love that she took 30 seconds to be like, nope, I still don't want to be a good public speaker, which I'm sure you have plenty of opportunities where it takes a little bit more. But in this case, it was like, let's just what if? I
Mhm.
wonder what if.
Because it wasn't an overwhelming ask. I didn't ask her, well, it's okay. You can do anything. Let's just have you do some public speaking next month. We can just set a goal. It's like, wait a second.
Uh-huh.
She has a
You had
belief
to
and
get buy in.
a buy-in, and I have to change her identity. She identifies as the worst reader and speaker in her class. I can't do anything with that until I'm able to get her to say, oh, so it's a chance I don't have to feel this way, and you'll help me figure out what I can do to start changing how I feel about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that's true, I might be a little interested in that.
Yeah.
And
It's almost like showing just a little picture of like, hey, there is another reality if that might be something that you could see. And a lot of times,
Mhm.
and I've had this happen in my own head, like I forget that, oh, there's actually another way I could be thinking about something. instead of just having this idea that this is what it is and there's no difference. It's almost like taking the blinders off to realize, like, oh, maybe my perspective could change.
Exactly. It's that's exactly what reframing is. Being able to,
Reframing.
yep, reframing, which means again, I'm not trying to change the fact. I don't want to tell her, well, you're a great public speaker, honey, and it's fine. You're a great reader.
That would be a great example of just empty affirmation of like, what do you mean you're wonderful at public speaking? I saw how good you were, on this thing. And the kid's like, no, you didn't. When was I doing
Because
that?
it's like, why would I say that? You just told me that you're in the bottom 1%.
Hmm.
I'm not going to change that fact, but I can change the story behind it. It means that there's room to improve.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Okay, so this little girl said, okay, maybe tell me more. What's next? How do you then proceed through that conversation?
Yes. So I said, okay, well, let's start putting in the practice because if you don't give your brain evidence, it's going to freak out. It's going to activate a part of your brain called the amygdala, which is our fear center. And it's going to do everything it can to get you to take a chill pill because your brain is designed to keep you safe. It doesn't care about your goals and what you want to do. So give it proof that you can start handling it. And so we started really small. I got her a phonics workbook and asked her to complete a certain amount of sheets. And then she could put a sticker on her tracker once she did that. Then we started reading more flashcards and she had a goal. Okay, I want to be able to say all the words in this flashcard deck. And we just kept shrinking down the big goal until she
Hmm.
started getting enough belief in herself of like, oh, like I can read because I can read this entire deck now, or I can make my G's in the correct direction now. And she just started becoming more and more confident. And then it went from let's finish 10 pages in this phonics book to, okay, her saying, I want to be able to read at a second grade level and read a hard chapter book by the end of the session. And maybe I'll do a public speaking engagement, which she did end up speaking at a showcase in front of adults before the end of that school year.
Well, surprise, surprise, a 7-year-old is not fully cooked. And the writing is not on the wall at age 7. If you're not great at reading yet,
There's some room there.
there's room to grow. Now, my math abilities at age 50, we'll see. Not
Questionable.
yet.
Not
Not
yet.
yet.
Not yet.
But at some point, I think I might sit down with Alpha Math and kind of go back and fill some holes and see if I could become better at math.
I've told myself the same thing.
It's one of my gripes with my
Mhm.
traditional school experience is that I was an exact example of somebody who had a lot of gaps in my math knowledge. And as I got older and went through more and more math, it became more and more confusing to me. And I became that person who's like, I'm not a math person. I'm not a math girl. When am I going to have to use this? And I will say Alpha is helping me grow a lot. I'm not there yet, but it does make me think like maybe this is something that I should revisit and understand. It's the calculus stuff that gets a little bit more. And actually, you know what else happened to me? I had a dream about 3 weeks ago that I was asked to multiply three digit numbers. It was like, 114 times 221 times something. Like it was some crazy amount. And I was like stressed out and having kind of a nightmare about this. And I woke up the next morning and I told my husband about it. And I was like, you know what I need to do? Let me actually sit down with a real piece of paper and let me actually test out what this would be like. And so I did recall that I knew how to do this. And so my husband, it was actually, I shouldn't overstate this. It wasn't three digit numbers. It was 2-digit numbers. And so I was trying to remember how to do this. But I did that. And then my husband, he's like, okay, now try this one. And he wrote some problem that I was like, I don't have any. This is Greek to me, and it was pretty funny. So I was like, I'm not there yet, but I will do. So yes, my math trauma still haunts me.
You want to know something funny? It's
What?
same for me. And it was part of why I was like not a fan of traditional education. Math was always my area where I had not been able to get like an A in math. I don't think I
Mhm.
ever got an A in math in all of my schooling. And I remember identifying as I'm not a math person. And then when I was in the application process for Alpha, we have to take the CCAT.
Mhm. The CCAT is a cognitive assessment test. It is you have to answer 50 questions in 15 minutes. I think it's either 15 or 20 minutes, and it's hard. And it does not only logic, but also there's some math on there.
There's a majority of the questions are math based. And part of why I also was not a fan of the school system is because I wasn't a good test taker.
Mm.
And to the point where my teachers would be like, I know you know this material
Mhm.
because you'll verbalize it. And they would sit with me after school and take my test and they would ask me the questions that I got wrong and I would be able to answer them. And they would be like, why did you
Mhm.
mark this wrong? Like you understand it. And I'd be like, I don't know. And I was just a terrible test taker. And that was also a part of my identity. And so I remember when this came, I was like, oh, this is literally going to have to be a growth mindset thing. And so I stopped saying, I'm a bad test taker. And I just started saying, historically, tests have been a challenge for me. But thank goodness we have tools. And so I've found courses on Udemy to be able to practice those math equations and looked up a bunch of different practice tests and I practiced over and over and over again. And I ended up scoring in like the 90th percentile on
Mhm.
that. And I remember just feeling so proud of myself for it, not because of the score, but because of the identity work that I had to do and also the reps that I got in. And it was like, oh, okay, like I can figure this out if I put in the work. I just have some holes that
Yeah.
I probably need to fill on time back.
Well, and another thing we do in our hiring process is you have to take the CCAT, and then the very last step, if you make it through the whole interview process, is you have to take the CCAT again,
With a proctor.
proctored, to make sure that you weren't cheating the first time or whatever. And one of the things that I've heard from people who come work with us is that they're like, maybe if they were worried or stressed out about the CCAT and they got through it the first time, it's when they then also like a second time, they're like, okay, like
Hmm.
I got this. I can
Hmm.
take
I
advantage of
scored
this. I
higher
can
on my
do
second
this.
time, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the CCAT, and people, sometimes I know we have people who listen who are excited about coming to work with us, which by the way, we need so many more people to come work with us because we have so much awesome stuff cooking. But I always tell people, I'm like, you can totally prepare for this exam. You can absolutely
Mhm.
learn. This is not a fixed mindset of you're either good enough to pass the CCAT or you're not. This is a great example. And it sounds like Alexis, you totally did that. Like, okay, I can prepare. I can work to achieve this and I can hit the minimum target.
Exactly.
And you crushed it. It's so funny. We got off on a tangent about places where we know we need to have growth mindset. And I think as adults, hopefully we get better at being able to kind of self identify where we might have fixed mindset and where we could incorporate growth mindset. But for parents who are looking at this with their kids, how important is it that the kid comes to this realization around where they should adopt a growth mindset versus a parent being able to say like, "Oh, I know I want to work with my kid on this area of having a growth mindset?" Or is it really just about let's teach the general concept of growth mindset and then the kid can put that into anything they're doing?
Well, you can't teach a mindset that you don't model. So, honestly, I think one of the first steps is making sure that you're embodying the thing that you want your child to learn. I actually think of one of my students, Emma, who gave a TED talk.
Emma makes the best macarons. She has a business that she started at Alpha around macarons, and they're so good. Every time I come to her school, I'm going to make sure I'm going to put an order in ahead of time.
You got to do that.
Yeah, because I mean, she makes them fresh, and so you can't just show up. She doesn't have just macaroons coming out of her ears.
Hmm.
But I will put an order in ahead of time. In fact, I'll remember that the next time
That
I'm
will
in
make her happy. And they
California.
are really
Oh, they're
good. Like,
fantastic. And by the way, she said to me when she's like, "I'm still perfecting the recipe," and I ate the whole box in the time I was at the school,
mhm.
and I came up to her and I was like, "Emma, your recipe is good to go. You are ready to like mass market this thing. It's so good."
Yeah, I'm so proud of her. She's incredible, and she gave a TED talk and talked about her macaroon business, and it was all about how kids
A
are.
real TED Talk,
Oh
not a
no,
not a
not a
pretend TED
TED
Talk.
style.
Literally, she flew to Texas and
Yes.
gave a real TED Talk on the stage at Moody Center,
Hmm.
the place where Austin City Limits is filmed. So it was a real deal.
A real TED talk,
And
and
by the way, she's a fourth grader.
a fourth grader with so much spunk and personality, and who is very passionate about making sure everyone understands that kids really are limitless. And she talked about how kids often have the most powerful brain in the room. And she mentioned neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to form new neural pathways and connections. And kids' brains are super plastic, which means that they can learn new things and adapt better than most
Mhm.
adults can. And they just have amazing brains to learn these new things. So it's great that kids are so programmable. And at the same time, that comes with a really big responsibility for us as adults because they're going to pay more attention to our actions and our example than they are to what we say.
I will tell you, I want to share something that I witnessed a few weeks ago, and I I think I put this as like a public service announcement because I just saw how much damage it did. I was on a trip recently in Idaho, and I had an opportunity to go on a horseback trail ride, and it was just a really basic trail ride. It was literally a nose to tail, like you're so slow. You did not have to have experience. And there was a little girl, I didn't know her, a little girl who was one of the people on the trail ride, and her mom was coming with her. And she was so excited to go on this trail ride. Her mom came and it was time to get on the horse. And the mom just mentioned to the wrangler who was helping her, she said, I haven't really ridden and I'm a little bit scared. And so they said, no problem. This will be fine. She got on and she said, don't let go. And the wrangler was guiding the horse, and the little girl was so excited about getting to go on this trail ride with her mom. And again, this was real low energy. Like these horses were not going anywhere. It was extremely, in fact, I'm a horse person. It was a boring ride, very boring ride. But they made it about 50 feet, and the mom was freaking out so much. And she's like, turn around, turn around. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And turn around. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I just felt so sad for this little girl. And I felt sad for the mom because I'm like, living with that much fear and that much fixed mindset around just like, I can't do this thing to the point that I will forego an experience that my daughter's really excited to have with me because I can't get over this fear was just such a bummer. And I remember watching this wrangler turns these two horses around,
Mm.
and they go back to the barn. And I just thought, what a sad model that was. What a sad experience to miss out on.
Because it sucks because children's brains are looking for patterns to detect. And so in that moment, what she learned was, oh, when we do new things, we get scared and we quit.
Mhm.
New things are scary.
New things are
That's what she
scary.
was subconsciously taking in that
Yeah.
moment.
And so let's talk about the growth mindset that we could have instead of saying new things are scary. And when I get scared, I quit. I think a growth mindset strategy we could use instead is like new things can be scary, but that doesn't mean we quit. We can still go forward. And I would talk to my girls about this all the time because I will say I'm definitely an adventurous person and I am a jump in and do stuff. And I really wanted to teach my girls to be like that as well. And so I modeled this early on and I would talk about things that they can be scary but fun. Like this is scary but fun. And then we also would talk about, and then there are some things that are scary and not fun, and those are things that we can look at and think about. And oftentimes what we can see is we might try something to see if it's fun. And maybe we might decide after a while, you know what? It turns out that's just scary. It's not really fun. You know what? I'm not really a roller coaster person. I've tried it. I've done it. It's not my kind of fun. It's that. And then we'd also talk about there could be things that seem fun but are dangerous. And so let's not do that and think about those things. And I think that is an important skill that we can say, okay, a new thing can be scary, but we can go. And when things get hard, I work harder.
Yeah. I work harder. I practice. I prepare.
Mhm.
And then I do the thing.
You mentioned that a lot of the idea around growth mindset comes around what parents are modeling
Mm.
at home. How much of that do you think you can see in kids when they have a fixed mindset? Are they picking up from their home?
More than I would like to see. You can't tell a kid to go and be confident and do all these hard things if every time you make a mistake, you're like, "Ugh, I'm an idiot." Like you say
Mhm.
these small things under your breath. And it's not teaching your kid by example that it is okay to mess up and they're paying attention to that. They're not going to become the person you're describing that they need to be. They're going to become the person that you're demonstrating.
Yeah. And one of the things I hear from parents at our schools on a regular basis is that their kids will be learning these growth mindset principles and they'll take them home. And then they will be the ones who kind of say to their mom, like, hey, mom, don't say that you look fat and bad in that dress and that you're never gonna whatever, or don't say you can't do this. And I think kids are always an amazing mirror for us as parents. And I've had more than a few parents who have said, like, okay, my kid has helped me become aware of some places where maybe I could incorporate more of a growth mindset.
I had a parent that came up to me and when she first started her student at Alpha, she said, there is one thing that I care about more than anything, and it's her confidence. I want her to love herself. I want her to believe in herself. She
Mhm.
lost her voice. If you can do that for me, I will be so happy. Fast forward, she's seeing the results. She comes to me and she says, "You did everything that I wanted you to do with my daughter." She said, "And I love you for that. But I also am a little upset because I've had to change a lot and I was not prepared. And they did not tell me that I was going to have to change too." And she came up to me today and she said, "Mommy, you said last night that you were going to go to the gym and you can't break your promise to yourself because if you do that, you're not going to trust your word anymore." And I just looked at her and I was like, okay, you're right."
I
And
guess I'm
so
going to the
I
gym.
guess I'm gonna go to the gym. But her modeling that, that student just, I mean, skyrocketed. Just an example of what it means to be an alpha kid that believes they can do hard things at all times and really believed in herself to the point where she took full range of her autonomy. I remember we had a grit workshop that was basically like mocking an NFL combine, and it also included a cold plunge in there. And mind you, this is a second grader. And so she was practicing her cold plunge, originally could only stand there for 5 seconds. And her mother told me that she kept asking her mom to go to the pool. And she said, it's 8 o'clock at night. That water is freezing cold. Absolutely not. It's going to be too cold. And she kept saying, "No, I want to go. That's why I want to go. I have to practice for my cold plunge."
Mm.
And her mom was like, "Okay." And so she took her and she said that she was just watching her and she heard her saying, "I can do hard things. I've got what it takes. I breathe when I'm nervous. I don't pump the brakes." And she was talking to herself over and over and over. And she eventually jumped into the pool. And her mom was like, "I just cried because I was like, oh, whatever they're doing is working." And at that point, it had only been about 3 weeks in. And
Yeah.
so for her to see her child do that on her own, I did not tell her to go home and practice. I did not tell her to do any of that. I was like, wow, she's really internalizing this. And because mom was at home making sure she did hard things and challenged herself and kept her word, it made it even easier for me to be able to hold that bar at school. And we were able to partner really well to get her daughter to really, really far heights.
Yeah, and I mean, growth mindset principles absolutely transfer to
Oh yeah.
specific experiences. If a kid can get a win and adopt a growth mindset in one area and then see success as a result, they absolutely are able to approach something new and say, okay, we can do this as well. And I think that also is important to highlight. We do unfortunately see this at our schools as well, which is our guides and our community is like pouring into kids to help with growth mindset. And then at home, the parents are not getting on board with this idea. And so sometimes that's hard. And of course, we can't control what parents are doing at home, and we shouldn't, right?
Mhm.
That's not our job to do it. Families
Mhm.
have a choice on how to do those things. But I would just encourage, if you're listening to this and just take a second to think like, gosh, are there things I might be doing to accidentally sabotage
Mhm.
my kids' growth mindset? And whatever school you go to, whether this is Alpha or any other school, just think about what are the great things that are happening, at school and how can we support that? And of course, the other thing to be thoughtful about is what are the places where school is sabotaging your kid,
Mhm.
which unfortunately I think happens a lot. And how can we really protect and move away from that as opposed to just saying, hey, that's just the way it is. My kid's bad at math because, the school says he's not great at this. He's a remedial student or whatever. It's like, no, no, no. There are things that you can
Mm-mm.
do to show your kid at home, like, hey, let's work on this separately. Let's go do a math app to work on getting better at this. And think of it from a growth mindset perspective, not as a this is punishment or this is something or let's just give up. We have in our schools fixed mindset and growth mindset posters, basically. And what are some of the other kind of statements that we talk about there?
I think the biggest one for growth mindset is I can't do this yet.
Yet.
Like the whole yeti and everything. The kids love
The
saying
Yet Yeti
yet.
is a stuffed animal that I think he's technically
He's a yeti.
a Yeti. I didn't
Mhm.
even know that there was a real thing as a Yeti, but to me, he looks like the snow monster.
He does.
Okay, that's a
Looks
Yeti,
like
I
the
guess.
abominable
And
snowman.
so, yes, we have the Yeti, And that's one of the cutest things I think about alpha that I'm always like, in fact, on my social media, I'll often be like, let's do a video about the Yet Yeti. And my social media manager's like, it's not going to go viral, Mackenzie. I'm like, but it's so cute
It
and the
is cute.
power of yet. And so, yes, we talk about, I can't do this
Yet.
yet.
And also another big one is failure is fuel.
Hmm.
Like I always say, do we like failure here, or do we shame failure? Is that a big deal? And everybody's like, no, it's not a big deal, because it's not. I need you to fail so that you can grow
Yeah.
and learn from it.
So, one of the things that we do at our alphas, we actually have failure buttons. Tell us about the failure buttons.
Yeah, so actually a part of one of their check charts, like their boot camp check chart when they first get in, is to hit the failure button, and it makes like a wonky want 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 sound, and then they have to tell a story about a time they failed and what they learned from it, and they have to say that publicly in front of everyone in the class.
Yeah. And this is, not a shame thing.
No.
It is a let's practice being able to own like, hey, here's a time that I failed and here's what I learned. And then the other thing it does is it helps the other kids like, oh, I'm not the only one
It
who's failed. Like
normalizes it.
this is a normal thing. And it's so cute when we walk into especially our younger classes, our kindergarten, first, second grade classes, pre-K even, when you'll hear the failure button. A kid will go and hit the failure button if they've had some sort of failure. They got an assessment wrong, or they whatever it is that they tried to do, and they got a failure. And everybody else in the classroom kind of cheers for them
Hmm.
because they're like, "Oh,
Hmm.
that means you tried." And with my girls, that was another thing. I love to ski. I grew up skiing, and so when I was teaching them to ski, one of the things that I said is falling is a sign of progress because that means that you're probably doing something that's a little bit challenging for you. And so when you fall, like that's a failure, and that's a sign that like, oh, I'm stretching myself and I'm doing something new, and failure is fuel. And I think that is so cute. When you see a kid that has internalized that message, that when they failed, they're like, I've done this.
And I love when they can articulate it. We had our kids run a 5K, and they had some pretty hard metrics to beat. And I remember one of my students came up to me and she said, I just want to let you know that even if I fail, it's okay because I learned a lot and I'll have the opportunity to get better, just completely out the blue. And I'm like, I love that. And you're so correct.
Yeah.
But they really do begin to internalize it if we continue to encourage them and normalize it. And it's just like, hey, it's not a big deal. Actually, if you're not failing, you're probably not doing anything big, anything to stretch you, anything worth really paying attention to,
Yeah.
because you're hiding.
And I think the other thing is teaching this growth mindset. It's not that hard to do. I think you mentioned how neuroplastic their brains are and how quickly they learn. And I'll give you an example of this. And then I'm going to ask you because I hang out in our schools, but I'm not in a classroom every day with the same kids, doing what you as a guide is doing. But a story I heard in California one time was from a family who had their kids do a shadow day. A shadow day is just one day where kids get to experience what alpha is like. It's part of our admissions process. And this family came up to me, and the parents said, it was the most unbelievable thing. Our kid came home from one shadow day, and the next weekend, we were doing a family game. We were playing this game, and our 5-year-old and 7-year-old are playing this game, and the 5-year-old lost at something, and he and his brother looked at each other and they high-fived and said, failure is fuel. And then the little boy goes, let's play again. And he said, and Mackenzie, you don't understand, family game nights can easily turn into tantrum throwing fits or crying or whatever. And he's like, in one day, these two boys came home with this new attitude, and that was their reaction. And he's like, and it suddenly my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, okay, this could actually be really fun. And so what I have to understand is, what the heck do you guys do in one day to make that level of, change in a kid that a week later they are still thinking of it?
Well, it's just a part of our culture. It's like it's everywhere. Like you said, it's on the posters. It's what we're talking about in our launches. It's what we're talking about in our workshops. We're closing out with shouting each other out for displaying life skills, of saying, yeah, I saw that you were really, really tired, but you kept pushing through and you kept messing up, but you didn't let failure stop you. You used it as fuel so you would know how to do it better the next time.
Yeah.
So there's so many different touch points throughout the day where we're circling back to that growth
And
mindset.
directly
Very direct.
speaking about it. Very
Very
direct
direct.
instruction around speaking about it. And in fact, and I've watched you hosts the shout outs at the end of a school day. When kids give their shout outs, we'll get kids together either by school, if the school's small, or by their level, which is like their grade general group. And kids will give shout outs. Hey, I want to give a shout out to Chris because earlier today, when I spilled my lunch on the floor, he came over and he helped me pick it up. And we don't just say, oh, great shout out. We actually, the guide
Ask
or
what's
a
the
kid
life
will say,
skill.
what's the life skill? What did that show? And it makes the kid think about, oh, what is that? Oh, that was uplifting others. And so it's uplifting others, keeping
Upholding community
community,
standards,
upholding community standards,
growth mindset,
growth mindset,
grit,
grit,
receiving feedback,
receiving
and
feedback, and
independence.
independence. So
Yeah.
those are things. And so I think that is such a cool part of being at a shout out closing discussion is when you watch the kid going, I want to give a shout out and wait, what is that life skill? And then sometimes a kid will give a shout out, then they're like, what life skill? And it's like, oh, I don't know if that is. Like, I want to give a shout out to Chris for his cool shoes. And you're like, well, let's talk about that. And it actually also helps kids really see the value of being a part of their community. And it's
Hmm.
one of the things I always say is that part of the reason I think we don't struggle as much with behavioral challenges is because we really educate kids on how to be a part of creating that strong community and they start
Hmm.
realizing like, oh, the best way to do that is to uplift others, to uphold community standards, to show grit and ability to fail and all those things.
That's one of my favorite parts about Alpha 2 because what I get from parents a lot is how their kids struggled with like bullying or were bullied at a previous school. And
Mhm.
it's just not, it couldn't survive in our environment because it's not the cool thing to do. The cool thing to do is to uphold community standards, to have independence,
Mhm.
to be an alpha kid, and to have a growth mindset. Those are the things that we praise literally every single day.
Mhm.
And so, kids want to be accepted. And if it's cool to do those things, they're going to get on board with it. So I love that because it creates a safe environment for kids. And also, obviously, we're able to do our mission, which is to help kids really believe that they're limitless.
Yeah.
And part of the reason our culture is so strong is because of how contagious the growth mindset is. You'll hear one kid, saying out loud, I can do hard things. I've got what it takes, really trying to get themselves to believe that they can take that next step and do that hard thing. And then the person next to them is seeing them do that. And they're like, I got it. I got this. I got this. I got this. And before you know it, your whole class is speaking to themselves and also speaking to one another.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I
Yeah.
love when I walk in and see
Oh,
these
yeah.
kids going, "You can do hard things too,"
Easy.
and they're cheering them on to something like, "You've got this," "You just don't have it yet."
Mm-hmm.
And it really is, it just becomes this amazing ripple effect
Mm-hmm.
where you create that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think we often are accused of is, well, of course you don't have behavioral issues because you guys are like this high end, ritzy private school. And so your kids are already going to be well behaved and you've got great parents at home and all of those things. And I do agree. We have lots more progress to be made when it comes to showing how we can scale and how we can work in a lot of different environments. But I really do bet that what you just said is a huge part of why we're able to have that. Because guess what? There's a lot of ways that kids can have behavioral challenges, and you will see it. I love seeing kids who come into our environment and they maybe do try
Mm-hmm.
on the attitudes and the behaviors that got them noticed at their old school.
Mm-hmm.
And then very quickly, it's like, oh, that doesn't fly here. And it doesn't fly because you're punished and
Right.
it's a top down thing, but it's other kids who are like, oh, yeah, that's actually not the way we roll.
Yeah, we
Like,
do this instead.
we do this, and it's
Mhm.
actually cool to try something hard and to do these things and to listen and respect others and not to heckle, any of that stuff.
Mhm. It does make a difference, and we don't get kids that are just, you know, no behavioral issues, just perfect, can do the 2-hour learning with no distractions and don't that's I don't think that's a realistic expectation. And I think that the environment plays a very large role in helping our students that maybe used to being the funny guy at school and want the whole
Mhm.
class to burst out laughing while a guide is giving instruction because that's what got the attention at the old school, like you said. But here, we want to see leadership. We want to see, when to turn your funny on, time and place, being able to listen and regulate and engage. That's what gets praised. And so eventually the kid ends up adapting, obviously with coaching too, but it does play a big factor.
Mhm. Yeah. I have to tell you, one of the most probably heartwarming stories in all of my years at Alpha. There was a boy who transferred into our school as a seventh grader, and he had been at the large public school that was in town, and he was a really good athlete, but he wasn't a great student.
Mm.
And that's part of the reason his family had decided that they wanted to have him come over to Alpha because they wanted to figure out how he could improve his academics between before he went off to high school to play football. And he showed up at the school, and my daughter was the same grade as this boy. And this boy was pretty cute for a seventh grade boy. Like my daughter was kind of, he's pretty cute. And he's, he was a cool kid, but he very much had the like dumb jock identity that he had put on himself.
Mhm.
Like, I'm a dumb jock, but I'm a cool jock. And so a lot of the things that he would do were like, I'm kind of too cool to participate in that. Like, and I'm not going to do that. And I'm not really like a school thing. And like, I'm not a nerd. Right.
Mhm.
And, so much kind of happened in the culture that was kind of doing this. But really, what was happening deeper down was he was insecure. He was struggling with this. Well, our guides and the whole community, was working with him through something. Well, he took an assessment, and it was like a Texas STAR test, which is one of the things we use to show mastery of something. And he took, it was like this, seventh grade STAR assessment, and he got 100% on the STAR assessment. And he asked his guide, the whole class was there, and he asked his guide, he said, "Could I please use your phone to call my
Mm.
mom? Because I want to tell her what I did." And so the guide said, "Sure." And this kid in front of the whole class called his mom on the phone, and he immediately burst into tears. And he
Mm.
said, "Mom, I'm not dumb. I'm
Oh.
not dumb. I can do these things." And my daughter got in the car at the end of the school day, and she looked at me. She's seventh grade. And she's like, "Mom, I got to tell you, like, this school is pretty cool because that was amazing to watch this boy who normally you wouldn't be caught dead crying in front of his classmates,
Mm-mm.
and just the joy and the excitement that he had and the vulnerability he showed of like, I'm not dumb. I've changed this." And it was really a magical thing.
I love that. That's a prime example of what happens when you're able to change the identity and you're able to go to the root and you're not just coaching the behavior. Oh, you're not doing good in school. Okay, here's a punishment. Here's more homework. That's not going to solve anything. That's the behavior. That's the symptom. But if you can go to the root, it's really, I don't feel secure. I don't
Mhm.
feel confident that I can do this because I don't have enough data to prove to myself that I can. And he
Yeah.
got data in that moment. And that's so sweet.
And I will tell you that boy, he did transfer back to the public high school.
Mhm.
So he spent 2 years with us and then transferred back to the public high school with his academics in a better spot. Was
Uh-huh.
a great football player, and he's now playing at a very good college at the
Oh.
football level. And his mom still reaches out to me and is like, those 2 years were really formative, not just in hitting academic holes, but changing his mindset
Mhm.
around academics.
Oh, I love that. That is so cool.
So if a parent is listening to this and sees that their kid sometimes does struggle with fixed mindset, here's the things of, well, that's not my thing, or I don't want to do that, or I quit, or I'm not good at this, or it'll never happen, or whatever. What are the tips that a parent can implement starting right now?
I would say don't try and change the fact,
Hmm.
change the story. And do that by asking your kid questions because you want them to arrive to this reframe on their own with your support. So you don't want to have to be the one to tell them, no, 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 you're super, super smart and you can do this and this, that, and the third, because they're not going to believe it.
Hmm.
But if instead you can ask them, oh, well, why do you feel that way? Or if a kid is like, I just suck at school, or let's say they're trying out for a team and they really want to get varsity and they didn't get it last year. They're going for it this year and they're like, I'm just not good at baseball, mom. I'm just not good at baseball, dad. That would be an awesome opportunity to connect and say, well, why do you feel that way? Listen for what they're saying, get the why. And if you still need to dig a little bit deeper, ask them, has there ever been a time where you felt really good at baseball? Because what they need is evidence that it's not necessarily true that they're not good at baseball. What's true is that they didn't make the team.
Hmm.
What's true is that they're going to need to put in more work if they want to make the team. There's obviously something that needs to be improved. And if you can help them to see that as fact and the story, you can change the meaning of the story they're telling themselves, then you can unlock that behavior change because their identity will change. So if you can ask them about times they have been good at a thing or any examples where it wasn't true, whatever limiting belief that is coming up for them in that moment, you'll be able to help keep the fact the same, but change the meaning of the story and help them reframe things so that they can actually move forward.
Yeah. Now, the last thing I want to ask you, because I think this is something that comes up very regularly, both in parenting as well as even with our own. There are some things that no matter how hard we work, we are not going to be. I will not be an Olympic gymnast, no matter how hard I work. I might not even be a gymnast, no matter
Mhm.
how hard I work.
Mhm.
What is that line, and how do you recommend going through something like that? A kid who says, you know, I want to make the varsity basketball team. It's a cutthroat thing, but you're not the best at that. What's the growth mindset strategy you would incorporate there?
Well, if, it was going to be a tough trajectory to get to that varsity spot, I still would say you need to get the reps in, you need to put the practice in, and also not become so caught up in the result, but who you're becoming in the process. Are you even the kind of person that can make the varsity team? Do you have the discipline? It's not just about the skill set of, practicing hitting the baseball.
Mhm.
But you have to be disciplined, you have to be timely, you have to have a spirit of teamwork. There's so many different things that you have to have in order to be a varsity player. I'd rather you focus on that.
Yeah.
So, even if you don't get the goal, there's so much win in who you become in the process. And that's what transfers over to any goal that you can have.
Yeah. My oldest daughter was a basketball player when she was young. And when I say young, I'm talking, kindergarten through, 6th grade. And she
Mhm.
was playing on a local neighborhood team. Well, in Austin, where we live, starting in 7th grade, you either go to club basketball, which is more competitive, or you're playing for your school team. And at the time, Alpha, wasn't large enough to have a girls' basketball team. And so my daughter and I sat down and, over those period of years, she had put a lot of reps in. She would practice a lot. She was a great shooter because she would practice a lot. And she also just had some things that, like, oh, she didn't necessarily have a natural understanding of where to be on the court or whatever. But, she was doing that. Well, we sat down before 7th grade and we had a conversation where I said, what would you like to do with your basketball career? Do you want to transfer schools so that you can play on the school team? Do you want to try out for a club? What do you want to do? And I remember she very thoughtfully, and when I say thoughtfully, I think that, there'd been so much practice that she'd had, both with us and in her school environment, where she said, when I think about all the things that I've learned through basketball, and then I think about where I'm eventually going to end up with basketball. She said, I'm not going to be a college basketball player. I don't even know if I'd, be able to make the varsity team at the, high school. But what I have realized is so many of the things like discipline and practice and putting the reps in, and that I enjoy, aspects of being on a team, those types of things. And she said, and what I really realized is I want to spend my time working on something that I do believe I have more potential, to do in the future. And she said, so basically, I think I'm going to hang up my basketball shoes, and she's a 7th grader. So, I'm going to hang up the basketball shoes, but I've learned how much I love, my music, and playing piano and playing guitar and singing and doing some of the acting that I'm doing. And it was just a great example of, like, being able to transition, because she wasn't probably going to even make her varsity high school basketball
Mhm.
team eventually, but she saw how she could take so much of what she'd learned and then translate it into maybe something that I can have more potential with and
A-
enjoy.
And you clearly must have fostered an environment in which she felt confident enough to arrive at that on her own. Like it didn't have to take you saying, "Mm, I don't really know if it's realistic that you're going to, be able to make that varsity team." She was able to actually assess and
Yeah.
practice self awareness and be honest with herself. And also was able to see, but I still got all of these great character traits on the inside of me that I can now go and take into my
Yeah.
music. So,
And I think that gets back to when we started at the beginning of this conversation, which is the difference between just empty affirmation and,
yeah.
come back to my trauma is that, you know what? I bet you that I could get to 99th percentile in math, in K through 12 math. I may not really be a NASA mathematician,
Hmm.
but I can have something that's like, yes, I can have a certain standard and a certain realistic thing that's still not set in a I can never, I am not, I will never, and I don't even want to try
Hmm.
to like, how do we have that? And I think some of my favorite conversations with my kids, and I'm sure some of your favorite conversations with your students, has been around how you help kids just look at things with a healthy attitude and where we can incorporate this growth mindset into whatever it is that we're doing.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Alexis. And I
Thanks for
can't wait
having me.
to continue watching you just practice all of these amazing growth mindset principles that you have spent your career really becoming an expert at. We're lucky to have you.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Mackenzie Price and the Future of Education podcast. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, now is the time to do it so you can stay up to date on all our episodes. You can connect with Mackenzie on social media and be part of our daily conversation over on Instagram at futureof_education. Lastly, if you're loving what you're learning, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back in your feed soon, but until then, remember, kids are limitless, and it's our job to unlock their potential.